starting in the company in a handful of weeks, we had bots like playing real human players in the game. And, the former lead of Clash Royale came up to me and he goes, puts his hand on my shoulder, and I'm staring at the screen, and he's like, Steve, how does that feel? And I'm like, it was so cheesy. What I could like come up with at the time was just like, it's like standing on the shoulders of giants. And I was like, oh, I wish I had something a little bit more profound to say.
So hi everyone, and welcome to the Turing Test podcast. Turing Test is a Siili's journey into the transformative power of artificial intelligence, specifically tailored for software developers and software business leaders. And for today's episode, we have Stephen Spencer, a senior machine learning engineer from Supercell. So welcome, Stephen.
Thanks, Juha-Matti. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. So my name is Juha-Matti Tirilä. I'm a data scientist and programmer at Siili. So Steve, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I have a pretty traditional software engineering background. I started in the early 2000s on Microsoft technology. I'm not afraid to admit that, before it was cool. And I got my first big break in equity trading. So I was mainly working in the back end, and then I sort of made the transition to fast forward another 10 years of doing that. I was working at a startup, and that was when I first got introduced to the whole concept of data science and machine learning. And then I guess I've been living in Finland for now, close to 20 years, and which led me to the games industry and here at Supercell.
So I see you. So you mentioned like Microsoft technologies. Does that mean like .NET and C# and things like that, or what does that mean?
Yes, and even before that, with COM and COM Plus, and even Visual Basic. It was that was a very humble kind of beginnings. But like a lot of people said, it was like not possible to do what we wanted to do on that stack. But I think we managed to prove a few people wrong there. So it was definitely an interesting introduction into the world of software development.
Right. Okay. Nice. So how about like education wise? So you've been doing software development and data related things. Is that something that you also studied in college or so?
Yeah. So I ended up I started my sort of studies like doing mathematics, and then I found out that I really had, I always had this passion for technology from a small kid, and my folks were probably like a lot of people's folks were like not that encouraging of following that career path. I guess this was like, way back in the day before it was .com boom time. So, my folks were a little bit dubious about this new fad of computers and computer programming. But then I ended up just like, when I moved to Finland, I ended up enrolling at the University of Helsinki into the computer science program. And because I actually had been working in industry for a while, but I actually wanted to learn more about like how to actually engineer things properly. And I was feeling that I was sort of missing out on a lot of stuff that the guys who had a formal computer science education had. I wanted to know what I was missing. It was quite fascinating. But like many people, I was like dragged back into industry. But I think it was like really like realizing the moment. So if I was to go back a step, when I said I started off in the bank, I actually started off like doing equity trading at the bank. I didn't start off as a programmer or a technologist. I was buying and selling shares and helping people out with their trading. And then the pool came. The position opened up in the technical operations team, and it just sort of just led me in that direction. So that really kind of kickstarted this sort of path to pursue more formal education and really like hone my craft as a developer.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I actually, I can say that I share the experience from the 90s that people really didn't maybe see a career in computers, like with computers, a realistic one. I think some of my teachers were sort of like laughing about some of us kids wanting to learn to program and things like that. So it wasn't like really taken seriously at the time, I guess. Also, with your math background, it seems like I studied math too, and I seem to encounter a lot of mathematicians in the field, like machine learning and data and related fields. So yeah. So can you tell a little bit about your role specifically at Supercell? So what is it that you're focusing on there?
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm in the central data platform team, and we affectionately call it Data Lab. And what Data Lab is responsible for in Supercell is to provide all of the tooling, infrastructure to allow people to get their jobs done. And anyone in the company, I guess our main focus of people are game analysts, machine learning engineers, data scientists. So we make all the tooling and all the compute power that they need to get their job done. And this is like a bit of a recent change for me, because previously I was, when I first started, was about 6 years ago. Um, I started in the machine learning team, and that was a very small team of 2 people, and we were had we were tasked with building machine learning products, and just with pieces of string and whatever we could find lying around at Supercell. It was a very different time. And so we've, after many years of implementing like different solutions for different parts of the business, kind of moved into this more central data platform role.
So can you tell a little bit more, like what sorts of data are you moving there, and what's happening over there, and how are the data scientists and other people accessing the platform?
Yeah. So the main interface for data scientists and analysts is Databricks. We have a Databricks installation that our team manages. And so their main interaction, their daily work is all done through notebooks. And we give them access to like several petabytes of data from the luxury of their laptop and their desk at work. So we aim like they can just like open up a web page and have access to all the data that on any game, on any aspect of the business at any time, which is quite. And when the business like is sort of evolving and we have new game releases, like we make those immediately available to everybody in the company. And we have this sort of very transparent nature. So pretty much apart from restricted very personal data, we try and make as much data as available to anyone around the company. So a lot of folks they sign up and they start Supercell and they immediately start receiving emails of data with the game performance figures and revenue and player numbers, and they're like, a lot of them are like, hey, is this actually, I think I've got the wrong email. And no, we send that to everybody. So everybody has like this transparency across the company.
Oh, that's really nice. So Supercell just had its largest game launch ever with Squad Busters. And how does a launch that large impact the work at your team? And what did that mean to you?
Yeah, it means like a huge amount of uncertainty, because we are aiming to have the biggest launch in history on any app store. We've had the help of Apple and Google to make this the biggest launch ever. And from where I'm sitting and our team, we handle like millions of events per second that our game servers are sending out. So we're logging, recording many things that are happening in the game, like monitoring those metrics. And so when the game goes live, we hope for the best, but sort of plan for the worst. So we kind of need to provision quite a lot of hardware ahead of time, because the amount of data and events coming in is actually staggering, and we don't know exactly how popular it can get. So for our team, it meant like keeping an eye on the pre-registrations, which is a great indicator of, you know, how much interest there is out in the public, and then also making the necessary planning steps. And the fortunate thing, so that's in terms of like capacity planning and just the nuts and bolts of engineering. And then the other side is like, we want to give people, what's super important is that the people have access to the data from, you know, day zero, that they can, because everybody has invested so much time and energy and money into this launch. Then they want to like actually follow the progress, you know, in near real time about who's playing the game, how many concurrent users, what's the revenue looking like, and this is like something that's been, you know, been in development for years and years, and this is the final sort of the moment where it's sort of released to the world, and we want to see, you know, exactly what's happening. So before the launch, we have to get all those, you know, mechanisms into place to ensure that the data sets are ready and curated, that things are going to flow naturally into the data warehouse, and that we have sort of insights. Because what will, in the game teams, what they want to see is like, you know, of course they want to see great metrics, but they want to see where are we not hitting our targets, and where are we, you know, what's working, what's not working. They're already releasing the game. They're already planning, you know, 5 steps ahead of what should happen next. And so that's, you know, really important that everything is in place in day one. And when you don't do it for 5 years, which is when I've been, you know, releasing a game globally, it turns out that a lot of that information is kind of like lost. And we really need to double check and triple check that everything is in place. Of course, that's why we have like soft launches as well, so we can ensure that when we release a game to a specific audience, so in certain countries, that we can ensure that all of these things are in place. But one of the most surprising things is that we have like so many concurrent users on day one. It all really went without a hitch, which is like a, you know, huge testament to everyone there, that they have like the engineering talent that goes into this sort of thing. So, of course, we've had many years of you know, practice at launching huge games. So maybe it's not that surprising, but it's certainly quite an achievement.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and there's a lot going on. So I guess these kinds of things happen for every release. Is there something specific analytics-wise or data-wise with this launch that you're looking into?
Specifically, it would be the same things, you know, that all the game teams are looking at. And, you know, that's like, we're looking at, you know, the DAUs and retention figures. These are like most important things to us, because we want, you know, as many people as possible to play our game and to, you know, keep playing game for years. So these are like the key things which are sort of common to all the games. You know, the game teams themselves are looking at probably more fine-grained metrics on how does the progression work in the game, how do the, you know, live operations work, what's really important, and how does that link to progression, things like this. So when they're designing like games and new features to the games, and they're actually like looking at what the player behavior is like. So they would be looking at very specific things specific to, say, for example, in Squad Busters, like exactly how, where is the point where people are churning, where do they keep on playing, these sort of things like that. So yeah, and every team does that, and we have like, you know, people who are like very much dedicated to doing analytics embedded in each team. But also, like, every single discipline is also looking at their particular area, and they're using data to make decisions. So, for example, it's not just the people who are responsible for running the live operations, but game designers are using the data platform extensively to monitor player progression. They're also monitoring like device performance. So if you're a client developer, you really want to know, how does your code perform on particular devices, specifically older devices. And then if you're, as a back-end engineer, you're looking at a lot of the server metrics as well. So it's kind of all encompassing. It's something that sort of binds the team together.
We talked about a lot, like regarding data and data platforms and things like that. So let's first focus on like machine learning. So what inspired you to get into machine learning in the first place?
Yeah, I didn't actually study machine learning at university. So it was actually when I joined a startup in Sydney about a decade ago. And then I realized, so the product that they were building, at the core of it was machine learning, so machine learning models. And that's what sort of enabled that product. That was what we say, like the secret sauce that made it work. And, they, built an entire business around machine learning. And then that was my first introduction. And I kind of realized like that, okay, there's something in this. And my job at that startup, when there's not that many people around, is to make sure that happens. Like everything, you wear quite a few different hats when you're in a small company. And that's really where I kind of felt that, okay, I had been doing back-end engineering for many, many years. And, there's only so many, CRUD apps you can do. And, after the sort of, equity trading, they have a lot of real-time constraints on. It's quite a demanding environment to work in. And this was like a whole new dimension that I had not been exposed to previously. And so what I kind of realized like quite early on is that there's a lot of guys who are very knowledgeable about machine learning. They understand how do the different, model types work, different algorithms, but they're not necessarily software engineers or engineers in general. So I really kind of found my calling there. It's like, okay, how can I take this amazing, talent, amazing products, and then productionize them and build them into products and ensure that they meet the same sort of rigor, engineering rigor as how we will approach a software engineering project. And so that was like the start of something like really interesting for me. And that's really how I got into machine learning as a sort of area. I carried that through to pretty much this day today.
Yeah, I'll just have to agree with you there. I think there's like a lot of times there's this, maybe not a disconnect, but like different sorts of like working culture and approaches to solving problems, between like machine learning people and then the software engineers. So there's a lot of work there sometimes.
Yeah, it's kind of, I've kind of seen a lot of times that we have like some fantastic models and using fantastic algorithms that look fantastic, but if they're not actually in production, they're not actually bringing you any value. And so it's kind of really, I see like a lot of places where there's so much work being invested, so much time being invested in modeling. And if you're not actually making that last leap to actually running those things in production and then closing that loop and getting the feedback from that model in production, then you're like missing out. So it's really, I always find that's the most satisfying part for me. It's like, how can we like move this in production and create a real living system?
Yeah, I think sometimes it feels as though some of the like machine learning tutorials and learning resources like that are a little bit guilty because much of the time you just train some model and then you maybe get some like model dot predict some, like some example values, and that's the end of the tutorial. So that's basically, you just have a model, you trained it, and now what? It's not in production. It's not like persisted or anything. So there's a lot of work still to do with that. And also all of the like comparing different models and different versions of the models and things like that.
Yeah, I would argue that was like actually where the journey begins. Like that's sort of like the step zero is like getting the model predict. And then what you do after that, once it's actually like integrated into your application, that's where actually the fun really starts. Is like, how does it actually behave in reality? And when you have this sort of effect on the population that you're working with, then that's where the real fun starts in. And that these things tend to have really, really long tails as well. So you think like, okay, I've spent like, a couple of weeks getting my data and model together, training, and once it's actually up and running, that's when the work actually starts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was about machine learning, but was it at Supercell, or how did you get into like data platforms and things like that, analytics and things like that?
Yeah, so I spent a little bit of time at I guess at Rovio in their central data engineering team, and so at Supercell we were in the sort of old model of things that we were, like I said, we were a 2-man team, so we were really putting together what we could with on a sort of shoestring budget, which seems quite ridiculous, but it was really the ethos of the company. It's like we wanted to stay as small as possible. So we were like, well, what can we realistically achieve with 2 people? And so the sort of bottleneck a lot of the times, was manpower. And that sort of made me, the natural progression from that is when we've actually gotten a lot bigger in the last couple of years, is that we have quite a few more machine learning practitioners, and analysts and data scientists and people who just use data to get their job done. So it was kind of like a natural decision for me. Like, okay, I can as a single person, I can probably implement a couple of projects a year and then keep them running in a minimalistic kind of fashion. But like, how can I then multiply my work and my knowledge across the company? And the way I could kind of do that is like, okay, how do I allow everybody to skip over all the mistakes that I made, and just jump straight to having the tools ready and everything's like presented on a silver platter. And in that way, I can like not only just do the work of one person, but I can sort of multiply my knowledge and my skill through the whole company. And so that's the way I thought that was a sort of a move for me as the company grew. I couldn't scale like by doing more work, but by being in the central data platform team, I could then scale that knowledge across many people. So that was like really the motivation for me to take that position.
Yeah, and I think it's like pretty. Well, it would seem to me that it's pretty natural for companies and organizations at these early stages of starting to work with data to not really know how much work it will require and how many people you will need and what one people will be able to achieve in a certain time frame and so on. So there's a lot to learn also when companies are starting with these things.
Yeah, that's very true. I remember when I started, and we were doing these like huge systems. I started it in Clash Royale, and we were building bots for Clash Royale, and this is a huge game. And I ended up visiting our San Francisco office and talking to some guys from Netflix. It was like my mind was already a bit blown then. And they were asking me about like, so what are you doing? And they were like fans of the games, and they said like, so how big is your machine learning team? And I said like, okay, we have 2 guys, like we're all here in the same room. And they're like, and like, so how many like plays, how many customers do you have? And like, oh, we have like, excess of 200 million monthly users. And they were like, okay, and you're building these things. Like, yeah, you can do that. I mean, it's hard work. It's not ideal, but you have to pick your battles. And so, yeah, that was, yeah, it's kind of like having this, startup kind of atmosphere in already like a fairly established, successful company. It was quite ridiculous, but it was like a lot of fun at the same time.
Yeah, I think the people at Netflix would sort of like know something about these things. I guess they're pretty known for their analytics and machine learning stuff that they've been doing over the years, right?
Yeah, they are like the inspiration for a lot of stuff. So it was like kind of, it was quite gratifying. I kind of interpreted it as like they were pretty impressed, but maybe in hindsight they were like, you guys are like a bit foolish to do that. But I think they were like, they're really great guys, and they were like really supportive, and they were asking like, so about the tech stack we're using and how do we solve these problems and at such a scale. So yeah, they were really like supportive, and it was really great to spar with them. But yeah, the like, the realization that all this sort of machine learning team was like standing right in front of them was quite funny.
Yeah, that's nice and that's funny. So, can you tell us about some of the most exciting projects you've been working on during your career? It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't matter whether it's like machine learning or data or whatever it might be. So, can you pick something?
Yeah, I mean, I think my career at Supercell has been like the highlight of my career. Like, and so I think it was like when I first started at Supercell was about 6 years ago, and I was like completely like a deer in the headlights. I was like inserted into I inserted myself into the Clash Royale team, and we were building bots that played the game. And one of the key things was like my colleague had a model that he had trained and worked, but it was yet to actually work in the game. Like we hadn't done any of the integrations yet, and I was, I had just started, and there's this huge game of, that probably at the time was 20, 30 million daily active users. And so how do we do this? And so I just went with what I know. And, we started off really small scale and really cautiously about inserting these bots and doing the integration at a very small scale. We monitored what happened to the players who played against these bots. And because we had a clear goal in mind is that, I don't know if you're familiar with Clash Royale, but it's like a player versus player game. And, how the matchmaking works, you're like, on average, you're going to win, around 50% of the time. And that means you're going to lose about 50% of the time. And losing kind of feels a bit bad. So we were thinking like, okay, if you can play a bot, the bot's going to provide you with a really fun game, but it's going to be just like a skill level that's just going to not let you win, but you're going to be able to beat it. It's going to feel satisfying. And the theory is that you are going to be able to like play a bit longer, and nobody's actually getting the bad feelings, from losing. The bot doesn't have feelings, so it's happy to take the loss and move on with its life through Clash Royale. And taking this sort of like, okay, we really treated like a bit like a small startup in this huge company. So we were like very conscious that, okay, we want to get this done in a couple of weeks. We want to get results straight away. So it was like within, starting the company in a handful of weeks, we had bots like playing real human players in the game. And, the former lead of Clash Royale came up to me and he goes, puts his hand on my shoulder, and I'm staring at the screen, and he's like, Steve, how does that feel? And I'm like, it was so cheesy. What I could like come up with at the time was just like, it's like standing on the shoulders of giants. And I was like, oh, I wish I had something a little bit more profound to say, but it was really true. I was like, that was my genuine feeling at the time. I was like, wow, like these, the people who made these games are like kind of idols to me. Like, all growing up as a kid, I just sort of, it was like a profession that was never allowed to pursue, as a kid. And here I was. And so that was like the most kind of amazing moment of like having this, like people were playing against these bots. Everything was working. It was, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. And to this day, there are still, bots, like a new and advanced and better bots in Clash Royale. And I guess the icing of the cake was that the theory turned out to be correct. Like, it's kind of been shown to work in many other different games as well. That if people like are playing against bots, they have a satisfying, experience. They will play longer, and generally like have a good time. So, and this sort of expanded into now like many different areas, in different games of creating bots for different purposes. But that moment, was one of the most exciting, and it happened like just after a few weeks of starting at Supercell. I was like, wow, like it's going to be pretty hard to top that one, like, But there's been so other like awesome moments as well at Supercell. So it's been a great ride. But I think that one was the absolute top for me.
So let's talk a little bit about company culture and data. So can you first describe the working culture at Supercell? How is it like to work with these guys?
It's a quite amazing kind of company. Like, I don't think I've ever worked anywhere quite like that. So the one kind of a feature that I kind of discovered, it's that everybody is encouraged to give feedback and also receive feedback. And guess what? Many companies do that. That's not a particularly, Supercell unique feature. But I think what's kind of exciting and is that like it doesn't matter like where you sit in the team, like regardless of your seniority or age or your history, like everybody has opportunities to brainstorm, to give ideas, to spar about game ideas or better ways of working, anything like that. It's like everything is up for discussion, and which is kind of unique. Other companies, like you feel like that you don't have opportunity to sort of affect the processes that go on, and so some of the most like formative and important things come from like some of the could be like a junior, could be the guy who's been here like 3 weeks, and I find that's like one of the biggest strengths is that everything is there's no real doctrine involved, that everything is sort of up for consideration at all times, and like the contributions from everyone are really listened to, and it's not just sort of some sort of like feedback box that you can like put in your feedback and a note in the corner and then they're just sort of whisked away. But there's this that everybody has. It's not just the responsibility of leadership. In fact, it's sort of everybody's responsibility to really like figure out how can they improve things, or just come up with silly, stupid, fun ideas. And of course, like 99% might be like not acted on, but the sort of encouragement to get everybody to participate. You're not just sort of locked into a certain box and filling a particular job function. That we kind of like it's much more of a holistic approach to creating games and day-to-day running a company.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think like many companies would like to have that, probably some like conscious, serious work went into creating that sort of a culture. I guess sometimes it's not like there are no bad intentions, but sometimes things just end up being done the way they've always been done, and nobody really gets to like question that, or nobody realizes that there's something maybe to question.
Yeah, absolutely. And even at Supercell, there's certain things that we've always, done, and you don't even realize that you've been, you have this fixed set way of thinking that, and sometimes it does take someone unexpected to sort of go, are you sure about this? Have you ever checked? You're like, and then sometimes like you actually, you might rethink your position on something, or you weren't aware that you were like had a very strong position, a very dogmatic approach to X. So yeah, it's something that will still, even with this sort of culture of feedback and ideas and being able to challenge existing ideas, like it still happens that people are like, no, this is the way, it's like this. And then, yeah, it might be a little bit later, but eventually if someone comes along and goes, hey, have you ever thought about it a little bit differently? And people are generally open to considering it.
Yeah. So you're the founder of Supercell, Ilkka Paananen, has been talking about data-informed culture. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so I think it means many different things to many people at Supercell, but I think it's like for me, it's like a contrast to a data-driven culture. So when we think about data-driven brought to the extreme, it means every single decision you need to have hard data to back your decision up, and there's really no room for emotion or even to some extent it kind of removes a lot of the creativity. And I think that's sort of the asset that a place like Supercell, it's probably arguably the biggest asset that we have is the creativity of its employees, the people there. And so I think when we talk about data, data informed, it means that we're like not slavishly following trends or following a certain formula, that we're able to like be creative and have bets. But then the informed part is that, okay, so we would like to be able to test what we do, and we are very conscious of like, who's playing our games. We want people to play our games. We want to have a great audience. We want people to have a really good time. And so it becomes like very important that we follow the data, but we don't sort of like are slave to a certain formula. I guess an example is like, something that's very topical at the moment about, launching new games is something that we haven't done for a long time. And I remember that people were trying to figure out, like, had these huge successes, and like, how do you replicate such? Is there a formula? Is there some sort of pattern that you can follow? Is there a threshold that you can, you have a game and you need to make a binary decision, like launch the game to the whole world or kill it. There's really only two decisions there. And some folks were scratching their heads, and saying, can we replicate the success conditions, or can we quantify what are those conditions? And many attempts were made, and we were philosophizing on what a lot of these things mean. But at the end of the day, there's not a single metric that you can look at, because ultimately, how do you quantify fun? How do you quantify excitement? Like, and a lot of it is very qualitative. So I think, like, when we talk about, data informed culture, it's like we don't just we do features or make changes just because it's cool or we think it's going to be amazing, but we do things that because we think they're fun and cool, but also we back them up with data. We try and measure them as much as we can, but at some point you just have to, like, there's no metric for people's instincts as well. And of course, like, people who are industry veterans as well, who have had like massive successes make poor predictions as well. So it's yeah.
So yeah, so there's the human judgment present at all times. So can you mention some examples of occasions where data did influence the decision making processes at Supercell?
Yeah, it's it's present in like everyday processes. So I think in the decision, when I said that the decision to kill or launch a global game, there's probably not one formula that's going to like decide one metric or a combination of metrics. Another good example is like which is very, very data intensive is live operations. And so what kind of events, what are we sort of investing a lot of money into in marketing? So we might like try different types of marketing, and typically that's very intensive in terms of spending. We want to make sure that we're sort of getting back our return on investment. So in terms of marketing and user acquisition, we want to have a positive return on an investment. So in that way, like data is incredibly important to be able to measure like your reach and measure like the spend of people, like when they're playing the game, in their lifetime, are they going to make up for that spend that we've made to try and acquire that player? That part is like one of the examples. Like, yeah, we'll and spend up to the point where it is is a positive return on investment. So that's something that that we can measure, and it's become a little bit more difficult in recent times, but still like super important. So in that way, that it's we're removing the qualitative aspects from that and being able to measure purely.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So, what are the main challenges you have faced while integrating AI and machine learning into existing workflows?
Yes. So if your application or your feature that you want to build involves several different teams, and this happens quite commonly. Like, so we have a team that's responsible for a particular system, and those systems are integrated into other systems. It becomes really hard, and so at the start it becomes very difficult because if you're pitching an idea, if you feel like you can use machine learning to improve a particular process, then you need to get the buy-in, not just from the owners of that particular product, but any other product that touches it. And so in the example in Supercell that we have, like, game teams are very autonomous, and they're responsible for their own technology and running their own technology. And so and there's another team, for example, that handles like our live ops platform. And so there's existing integrations between those. So if we propose that we want to do some integrations of machine learning into both those products, it's really hard to like coordinate timetables and priorities and get alignment for three teams. And we often refer to this as like colloquially as doing this little 3-person dance. It's like really awkward, and people are tripping on their feet. And it's like one of these like kind of things that are, typically our strength about having like these very autonomous cells that take complete responsibility for their work, and not having this very central top-down organizational structure. But then it's really hard to actually get, like, everybody has their own priorities. How do you convince them that you're going to be able to make an improvement to a particular business process, a particular metric? You don't, and of course, like, as a data scientist, you're probably like, we'll probably take the approach that, well, actually, we don't actually know that it's going to improve, but there, there's some sort of talk about confidence intervals, and then the product owners and the teams are like a little bit dubious, like that you can't actually guarantee anything. So I think that's been like the most difficult part, I think, of like actually getting anything done. And that's like not just at Supercell, but I think in the in organizations in general, like if you need to coordinate between like several teams to get your job done, then it becomes like I think one of the solutions that we've come up with is just by embedding ourselves in the teams, we can then, participate and try and like drive that particular feature or project forward. But yeah, it's kind of tricky, especially when the folks might not have had such exposure to working with machine learning systems. They might be more exposed to, say, working on traditional, software engineering projects. And if you give them like, well, there's like a good chance that this will work. Like, we're giving them some sort of like probability. And then of course the technology might be another, So definitely like, getting that coordination between those teams are like pretty tricky.
Yeah, that's pretty insightful, and already like contains some advice for companies. Maybe do you have any other tips for companies to get started with integrating AI or ML into their workflows?
Yeah, I think like the thing that sort of gets a lot of like people off track pretty, because it's a huge ecosystem now of platforms and libraries, and there are so many choices. Like, where do you start? Like, there's it seems like the landscape is becoming more and more complex, but I mean, it doesn't have to be as complex as that. And I think the example, of like turning up in the first couple of weeks, and you can like, or if you have a game that's got 100 million monthly players, you can still like introduce your machine learning model without the use of dedicated platforms or anything. Of course, you're relying on your like engineering team to do it and your engineering skills. But I think a lot of cases, like, people get very focused on like, we need like quite a lot of components to get started. And I would argue like getting started just means like, starting very small scale and working up. So, and I think like one of the other things like is being able to measure what you're doing. Because I think I've been involved in some machine learning projects that we're focused so hard on doing the integration and building the models that once we've actually released it into wild, like, we don't actually know what the effect is on the product that we didn't actually build in the time to measure and iterate. So I think that's another like really key component that so many people miss out on. But yeah, so I think that those were like the two main ones, and of course, like, once you get going, then you can like start being more sophisticated, but not to get too bogged down in the and. Yeah, I think the other sort of pitfall I've seen like happen many times is like and this is something like guilty over here as well with, is like looking at state of the art algorithms, like, and looking at the results from papers and conferences where they have some fantastic results, but and which looks really great, and until when you want to actually use them, and there's no like ready implementation for all your in a nice like library somewhere, and so you go off, yeah, I can probably build that. Like, I'm a pretty clever guy. I can figure it out, and so you end up building like implementing the algorithm yourself, and even if you're doing it quite successfully, you might there are many factors that like. You have maybe there's a bug in your implementation you don't know. So yeah, that was like, and of course it takes a long time. So you might like then exchange like to time to go to market is more, we prioritize that over like your model accuracy. Because eventually, like the best models will be added to your favorite libraries, and maybe it's more important just to get it out to production, get it out in the wild, and then be able to measure that against what your existing baseline is. Yeah, and that time to market is so important. And if you're going to spend 6 months or a year building your own custom implementation, that's a huge investment for potentially a small game.
So I guess we could start wrapping up briefly, talking a little bit maybe about generative AI. So we have some predictions and some goals at Siili. So we aim to double our productivity with Gen AI-based coding assistance. What's your experience with those, and how realistic do you think that goal is?
I think, well, my experience with AI coding assistants, like I've actually only recently started using them myself. I was a skeptic. I saw a demo of Microsoft Copilot last year, and to be fair, it was kind of impressive. But even I don't know if it was a demo effect, but even with the guy who was demoing from Microsoft, he had a script that he was working to, and it went off script and almost immediately. It's like, oh well, it didn't generate exactly the code that I was expecting in the demo. And I think, to be fair, the product's improved quite a lot since then. And so I've started using it myself now, and it's kind of impressive, how much that it actually helps, with boilerplate kind of code. Yeah, so, and I think that it's probably one of the biggest successes of AI, even thinking about Supercell, is the ability of our internal IT teams to roll this out to everybody. I think that's had a massive impact, probably one of the biggest impacts to developers for a while. But yeah, in terms of doubling productivity, I don't know, I'm not sure. If I think about my days, I spend nowadays not that much time coding. So, I mean, if the AI assistant will help me with my coding, it's only a very small fraction of my day that's going to be saved. So, but most of the time I am talking to my colleagues, discussing things, trying to but I guess that's also one of the jobs of being, a senior engineer, is that you get a little bit more hands off and more of into hey, can we the day-to-day running of the team projects and things like that. But yeah, I'm cautiously kind of optimistic about the way it's going to be traveling. I'm still worried about counting the number of fingers on hands for generative AI. I think once it gets that right, I think the coding will fall into place.
Then on to our final question. When do you think generative AI will be a better developer than us humans?
Yeah, if we're talking about generally about humans, the general populations, I think it's already better than 95% of all humans on the face of the earth. But if we're talking about very small subset of the population of developers, yeah, that would be a tough one. I think it's one of those ones where that will be very competent at doing boilerplate code very quickly. But I don't know if it'll be a little while until you see some truly beautiful or inspirational code. It's quite possible. I kind of maybe making the sort of games being quite close to my heart at the moment. thinking about like the moves that the AlphaGo was playing. That I was watching the documentary not that long ago, and the sort of amazement of the grandmaster of like that the moves that the AI was pulling that he had not been able to predict before and not actually seen. And I think I'm waiting for that moment where like there will be some code that actually you won't find from Stack Overflow and you won't find from your neighbor developer, but it'll be something like truly novel and interesting. That would be like quite a day, but I'm not quite sure when that's going to happen. It's probably sooner than I think.
With that, we'll conclude today's episode. Thanks, Steve, for joining us today. And thanks also to our viewers and listeners for being part of the Turing Test podcast. The Turing Test podcast is part of Siili's journey into the transformative power of artificial intelligence.